If you've had a history of dieting, low self-confidence, low self-esteem, or a history of an eating disorder or disordered eating, then you probably struggled with your own relationship with food. As a dietitian nutritionist, I have been there. That is the whole reason that got me into my own profession, is my own personal struggle with food. So in today's video, I want to help you rebuild that relationship with food one step at a time. And believe me, if we talked about all the ways that you can rebuild your healthy relationship with food, then we'd be here all day and all night and probably all week. So this is going to be a short overview of the first few steps that you can take to rebuilding your healthy relationship with food, but it is by no means an exhaustive list, and I'm sure we'll be doing plenty follow-up videos to this video in the future. Let me know what specific questions you have in the comment section below, and I will be sure to follow up and make a specific dedicated video on that topic. The first thing that you can do to rebuild your relationship with food is to give yourself unconditional permission to eat. Especially for those of you who have dieted or had disordered eating, this can be a really scary thing to allow yourself to do. But hear me out. Unconditional permission to eat means that you have no rigid or set diet rules around food. So that means when you're hungry for a specific food, you actually eat that food. And that definitely can sound scary because I think we're taught to restrict or deprive ourselves of certain foods to get the figure or the body or maybe the energy levels that we want. But what happens when we make hard and fast rules around foods, or we label foods as good foods and some foods as bad foods, is that we put the bad foods or the foods that we can't have on this big pedestal. And what inevitably happens is that you cannot stop thinking of the food that you can't have. It becomes the bad boy. It becomes the food that you cannot stop thinking about and that you fixate on day in and day out. Whereas if you just allowed yourself to have unconditional permission to eat that food, you wouldn't fall into the Last Supper syndrome that tends to happen when you exclude a food from your diet. So what I mean by the Last Supper syndrome or the Last Supper effect is that when you tell yourself, I can't have ice cream, the day that you do that, you tend to go to the fridge, have that ice cream in your fridge and be like, well, I have it in my fridge, so I might as well eat it now before my diet starts tomorrow. And then what happens then? You think about all the things you're gonna miss when you can't have ice cream in your diet. And then you overcompensate and overconsume that food because you feel like it's the last time you'll have it. This is a normal human response to starvation or deprivation of certain foods. Or back in the day, the caveman days, if we thought we weren't gonna have food for weeks upon weeks, we would gorge ourselves. We would eat as much food as humanly possible to stay alive because our body would then feed off that energy and that excess fat that our bodies had as a result of eating more food. So it is a normal human thing. So I just want to take a quick second to normalize that and to let you know that you're not alone if this is something that you experience. It's so relatable because all of us have gone through this before when we deprived ourselves of food. So yes, all foods fit: pizza, tacos, donuts, any type of food. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if your brother or sister or coworker thinks that it's an unhealthy food. It doesn't matter if it's a healthy food. All foods are allowed in your diet, and the more we incorporate that into our eating philosophy, the less at war we're gonna be with food. The second step to rebuilding your relationship with food is to slowly incorporate forbidden foods. This kind of goes along with the last tip, not exactly the same, but here is what I mean. So when we give ourselves unconditional permission to eat, like we did in the last step, we have a lot of foods that we formerly did not have because it was not allowed or because we were told that it was an unhealthy food, but now we're gonna start incorporating foods into our diet. And what I want you to refrain from is going all out. Yes, give yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods, but if you don't feel comfortable consuming all of the foods you once restricted from yourself, don't feel pressured to suddenly just eat all the Pop-Tarts and all the pizza and all of the forbidden foods in one go. In fact, that can actually have a backfiring effect because then we can kind of feel overwhelmed. So start with one food. If you feel too uncomfortable to just completely give yourself full permission to eat all the foods that you once enjoyed, stick with one per week and then add it in slowly. And that is an easy way to start exposure therapying yourself to those foods. And let me just preface too that if you struggle with this and you need support, that is absolutely warranted. And most of the time, I would recommend working with a dietitian or a therapist, or a dietitian and a therapist when you are reincorporating these foods, because it can be a real struggle to deal with the emotions and the kind of backlash that comes when you start reincorporating these foods, because a lot of things can come up in your head and you might need to talk those out. So if you need a dietitian to work with you, I do have a nutrition coaching application in the description box below. So moving back into reincorporating those forbidden foods, the phenomenon that comes into play when we start reincorporating foods is habituation. And what happens with habituation is once you start regularly incorporating forbidden foods into your diet, they become less exciting. They kind of lose their spark, they lose their excitement, and that's a good thing. Like if you've ever had the same food day in and day out, during my dietetic internship, I was having peanut butter sandwiches a lot. And I love peanut butter and I love sandwiches, but it was just starting to lose its luster to me and it was starting to get a little boring. So I had to switch it up. And that's one example of habituation. And with reincorporating these foods, just make sure that you're practicing non-judgmental awareness. I know it's tough and I know it's easy when we have that diet mentality in the back of our heads that we've been so adapted to and so trained to believe. Just know that the more that you practice this habituation and incorporating all foods into your diet and slowly reincorporating those forbidden foods, it gets easier, and it gets easier to talk kindly to yourself and to rebuild your relationship with food. So the last tip that I have for you for today's video is going to be make note of where you tend to feel that distrust around food. So where does this tend to happen to you? Where does the distrust come into play? And this could be all places. It could be at home, at work, with coworkers, with friends. It could be everywhere, and that's okay. If it's everywhere, then list all the different places where this comes up for you. You can also notice that it only seems to pop up in certain places. So maybe when you log on to Instagram, you start to feel these negative feelings because you start to compare yourself with other women or other men like you that are eating certain ways. I also have several clients that have mentioned feeling guilty when they go to a birthday party and they have food that they might not normally be around. So maybe cake or ice cream or soda or things like that. It can also be a certain person or a certain friend that tends to trigger these emotions, also a family member. This is also very common. A particular person that maybe has less awareness of how their actions affect others, they can tend to trigger these negative emotions in you. So I've had clients whose parents made them feel guilty about food and therefore they started hiding foods at a young age, or started feeling bad when they would eat foods around their parents. Or a friend group where maybe beauty is really highly valued, and when you eat a certain food that's not deemed as healthy, you get judged. So that can be another example. This awareness will help you unlock the root of your distrust in your body. And again, if a lot of negative emotions pop up, make sure to reach out to your therapist or dietitian to walk you through these things, because there's a lot of emotions that come with it and a lot of time and energy that it takes to really rebuild this relationship. So I don't want to try to pretend like it's easy or like you can do this overnight, because it's absolutely not true. It is a lifelong journey, especially as someone with a past history of disordered eating. I know it's really, really tough for me every day, and some days are easier than others. Some days I have to remind myself and say these mantras to myself to remind myself that all foods fit and that all foods are neutral. They're just food, and I can fuel my body with whatever my body craves and sees fit. But when you struggle with self-esteem and confidence and eating issues, it's something that you're always going to likely have to have in the back of your head. And that's not to say you'll never heal. That's not to say that you'll never feel confident and comfortable in your body, because you will. I know you will. It's just not a one and done thing. And that's the one thing that I want to drive home today. Again, if you'd like to work together, application is below. I also have the Mindful Muscles nutrition guide that I'd love for you to check out. And soon I will be having another challenge around mindful eating and mindful fitness. So I will drop that in the description box when that is out as well. But until then, I will leave some videos that I think you'll like in the end card and in the description box below. And I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.